Hi, my name is Darren Joseph from HCJ.tax, and we're the team that seeks to demystify that sometimes confusing world of international tax. And today we have the honor and privilege of having another conversation with Mark. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Mark Morris. I'm based in Zurich. I've been here for nearly 30 years, and I've exclusively devoted myself to automatic exchange of information since the year 2000. And I've been consultant to the EU Commission, the EU Parliament, the OECD regarding automatic exchange, as well as consulting for Tax Justice Network and various other parties. And I would say today, after 25 years, I'm the only person in the entire world that is promoting structures in 4 or 5 different territories that nobody seems to touch. But we'll go through those territories today.
Fantastic. But could you talk to us a bit more about the history of the sovereign British air bases, the SBAs?
This is the one that has required me to do the most research. It's taken months to find out what's happening. And only recently I began to get replies that people had asked HMRC, what happens if I am married there and my wife doesn't work, and all those questions. It's very complex, but there's a gap that in tax residency that I exploit. As you all know, the Crimea War, going back 1800s, was the Britain and Turkey were fighting the Russians. In the late 1800s, after that war, Turkey was worried about the Russians, I guess. They never stopped fighting. Turkey said to Britain, we'll give you, the Sultan of Turkey said, we'll give you the whole territory of Cyprus if you promise to defend us and fight with us against Russians. There was a deal done. It was a British colony for many years, but the locals were really fighting against that. They weren't happy at all, especially in the 1950s. They actually were bombing the UK soldiers and killing them. 300 UK soldiers lost their lives there. And there was a strong movement to join up, amalgamate with Greece. The UK said, we'll give you independence as long as you don't amalgamate with Greece, but we're going to keep 2 bases here to keep an eye over this because of the fighting, but mostly because of the Suez Canal crisis. Britain and France used to own the Suez Canal and control it like America did with the Panama Canal. But then a new president, I forget which one, earlier than that, came along and for popular reasons invaded the canal to kick out the British and French. The British and French parachuted troops and invaded with tanks. And they were marching across Egypt. And then Russia stepped in and said, if you don't leave, we're going to nuclear bomb you. And then America stepped in and said, listen, you're causing World War II. Get out of Egypt totally. Amazing that they did that. So when the UK left with its tail between its legs, they still wanted to keep an eye on what was happening in that part of the Mediterranean, on Algeria, on Lebanon, on Syria, same like today, okay? So they kept the 2 bases. So Dhekelia is a military army base, call it, and then Akrotiri is an air base. And what was interesting, when the treaty gave Cyprus over, the colony of Cyprus over to the locals, there were all other territories, British have self-determination, i.e. eventually you can ask for independence. But the British overseas territories are 2. It's about 250 square miles. There was no, it was done in perpetuity. There's no self-determination for those 2. And the other thing that's different is everywhere else, I told you that the British governor is appointed by the Foreign Department, Commonwealth Department office, but not so in Akrotiri and Dhekelia, the sovereign base areas. The governor is the most senior military officer there, and he's appointed by MOD in the UK, not by the UK government, okay? So it's unique. So it's British overseas territory, plus the UK got the right to use some other little pieces of territory for communication purposes. For instance, the top of Mount Olympus, the tallest mountain on the island, 2,500 meters, there's a UK radar base on the top. And there's about 6 or 7 little villages around that the UK can use for communications and support. But what was interesting is when they handed it over, there were 11,000 local civilians living on the bases, and they didn't kick them out. They could have, but that would have caused a big problem. So they said the locals can carry on staying there. There's no border. When you drive there, you don't know you're there. You might see a post somewhere on the sign saying, "Welcome to Akrotiri." The only border is between Dhekelia and northern Cyprus, the Turkish conquered part. So there's a strict border there. They can't use the sea to import stuff. They can't have a port, so they've got to import via the normal ports. So the 11,000 civilians that live there, in the beginning, the first few years, maybe the first 20 years, you had to be Cypriot citizen to live there. But then when there was this EU and Britain was going to join the EU, and then they said, okay, EU people can live there. And then they said, basically anybody can live there if they get the right from Cyprus. Now you have 11,000 civilians. But what they said in the treaty of handing over Cyprus colony is the locals are not allowed to develop any property there. They can refurbish houses, but they can't build in. No new businesses are allowed to be set up there unless the business is to service the military, like a fish and chip shop or a gym. Okay.
Mark, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
As I travel a lot, the best way to get hold of me is via my website, co-ownershiptrust.com. And then you can email me or try get hold of me by phone, but that depends on the country that I'm in. If they've got cell phone coverage, I go to some really remote places in the world, Falkland Islands, St. Helena, etc. So the best is via my website.